Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Tech Talk, a podcast where we talk about various technology related topics. Each week, we usually pick a topic and do a deep dive on that topic. We have had, in our previous episodes, we have had a number of guests. Today is another special episode because we have Sabreena Ali here with us today. She is a notable person in unified communications. Unified communications is well, I'm not going to try and define that. I'll let Sabreena do it. But yeah, we're very pleased, Sabreena, that you can join with us today and talk about unified communications. It is a very vast topic as far as I know. So it would be really good for us to know more about it, and also the audience would benefit greatly from knowing what it is and what it's all about. So yeah, thank you, Sabrina, for joining us. If you sort of maybe start us off with what is unified communication, and how did you get into this industry?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Rinat, and thanks, Amit, for having me on today. Really excited to talk about unified communications, UC, as we call it. So in the simplest form, I'll say unified communications is all about the integration between different tools that we use on a daily basis. So for example, our email, instant messaging, I am present, audio, PSTN and voice over IP dialing, and now more recently, video conferencing, and the integration between all of this. So yes, you're right. It's a very vast area. A lot of companies do it from end to end. So yeah, that's UC in its simplest form. But what I will say is, when I first joined the industry several years ago, it was a very different scenario. It was a very different scene rather. So I remember starting in telephony. So it was PSTN at the time, and then we introduced voice over IP. So all of those platforms started emerging. So, and then I was introduced to video conferencing. Now, in my career, that was my next job after telephony. So it was a very gradual but obvious progression. But when I was first introduced to video conferencing, I remember the first day at my new job. I had a video conferencing desktop system. It's a Cisco telepresence system, which in those days were called Tandberg, and it was a large screen, and I could see myself, and it intimidated me at the beginning because I was looking at it as a mirror. I didn't want to speak to people. I was very nervous, very shy at the time. Now, today, where I am, it's just, it's built inside me. I can't live without video conferencing. So, there are different kinds of users. You'll have those who will join a video meeting, but they won't enable their video. You'll have another set of people that will enable their video only if other people are enabling them. And then you'll have the last kind that won't enable video at all. They just want to be on audio for whatever reasons that may be, for privacy, or maybe they're shy. That doesn't matter. But there's always these three categories. There may be many reasons why the third kind of person will turn their video off. It could be privacy, but it could also be that they're just not comfortable in front of the camera. A lot of people, it takes adjusting to be on video, and face-to-face meetings are a very different situation. But when you turn on a video, not many customers or users are comfortable with video conferencing. They just don't want to be there because they're so used to telephony and being on an audio conference that there's no need for video, or that's what they believe. But we can talk more about why that's important. But yeah, I'm really proud of the progression that it's made over my career as well. When I started in PSTN, and now we've moved on to not only video conferencing, but the integration with APIs and SDKs, people forming their own applications on their phones. And we'll speak more about how that works. But it's amazing because now we're introducing AI into all of these solutions as well, and that's amazing because that's where we need to be. That's how mature our platforms need to be, integrating with different tools, not just the one tool. It's not just about audio conferencing or a specific area, but it's about integrating with different chat tools, different platforms, room systems, etc. And as you asked me, Rinat, yes, thank you. When I joined, it was only about H323 and SIP-based endpoints. So we used to look at all of the conference rooms that were enabled with video, and at the time, only C-level people were using it. Now we've got the applications on our desktop, laptops, and we're using it on our phones, tablet devices, everything, and we're using it on a daily basis. So yeah, that's where we are today.
Oh, that is amazing. I mean, video conferencing have evolved quite a lot from what it used to be. And yeah, I mean, I haven't been involved in video conferencing from that early stage. I mean, you've been in the industry for over a decade now. So you've seen the whole journey and what it used to be and all the etiquette and how it all changed. This is actually very interesting to know because yeah, before it was only the very senior executives who would be using. There was dedicated video conferencing room, but obviously, now this is also very eye-opening that you see it's not just video conferencing. I mean, obviously, it is a big part of it, but it also has other communication methods, PSTN and the other ones you mentioned. That is very interesting.
So I have a lot of questions, Sabrina. I mean, you mentioned so many terms: SIP, VoIP, PSTN. I think it's useful for our audience also because a lot of them may not know what the terminology stand for. So I know that PSTN is basically voice calling. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Correct. PSTN is voice calling, but on the standard sort of protocols, the audio protocols that we use via telephone, our desktop telephones. It's completely different from the voice over IP. So the PSTN calls will incur a charge from your local countries where you're dialing from, your provider.
Okay, so that's PSTN, that's voice call, and then we have voice over IP. I personally have used voice over IP, and I find it very fascinating because earlier we used to use Skype, and Skype you could add some credits, and then you could call say UK, or if you're in UK you can call India. So it was quite cheap. So and it was quite a new model of calling India where you don't need a calling card or you don't need to pay those exorbitant fees for calling abroad, and that just changed the game. But can you talk a bit more about that technology? Like, how is that possible? Like, you are actually calling a landline over the internet. I mean, it sounds very interesting and very difficult, but how's that achieved?
So with the voice over IP, you have to have an MPLS network. You have to have a network provider that will, incur those sort of charges. But it's nothing like PSTN, right? So you've got data centers in different locations where you can then make those IP calls. It's just calling over the internet. It's internet protocol, right? So you're calling over the internet essentially, and you're not using any local providers that will charge you those PSTN costs. And that's where we've come to at the moment, essentially.
Interesting. Renat?
Right. Okay. So, um, going back to video conferencing is what we're using right now, and obviously because of the pandemic, the use of video conferencing has skyrocketed. Now, what I don't understand is, there are various video conferencing or sort of video calling services available for free. Like, for example, in Facebook Messenger, you could have like group calls for free for a long time, and but then there are paid. I mean, obviously these companies have to make money some way, but there are companies like Zoom and various other video conferencing company. I think the one you work for, Blue Jeans by Verizon. Um, Obviously they have paid subscription model. So I mean, why do people go to the paid subscription when there are already free services available like Google Meet or Facebook? I know it may not be much professional, but the service is available. So what is the big difference there?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's a question that a lot of the customers that I deal with on a daily basis ask, first of all. Now, you have to think of where the UC has, the technology has come to today over the years. It's not just about, meeting and hearing each other on voice and video. It's changed, we're introducing so many other features. Now, yes, you'll get free subscriptions, but you have to understand the limitations. Now, for a basic user who's going to be maybe just using it a few times from home for a quick call here and there, they won't understand the difference. And that's why we also need to, teach them the adoption, because they don't understand the number of features that can actually be used for their day-to-day meetings. It's very easy to have audio and video in a call. However, think about, the other features involved, like transcription. You've got all of the recordings, cloud recordings, for example. But in a professional scenario, when you're paying for a professional license, you get a number of features. Like you've got the tools, analytics tools, like dashboards, for example, where you can see reports, you can see your historical calls, how many minutes you've been using the tool for, what kind of attentiveness the other person had. It's grown so much as a platform, and I think users need to be trained on this, because you're very right in saying, yeah, we can hear and see each other and we're calling each other, we have group calls, but do you have the other features like transcription, like automatic subtitles, live translation in different languages, cloud recordings? You've got local recordings, but with the cloud recordings you have a various amount of storage. You can do so much with that, because there are tools that also have, for example, AI integrated, where it's not just about having a meeting. You want to make sure that that meeting is efficient. Now, how will you make the meeting efficient? If it's a 2-hour-long meeting that someone can't attend, they're very unlikely to look at a 2-hour-long recording as well, because they're busy or for any other reason. But there might be key elements within that meeting that they need to understand. For example, if I'm in sales, I might need to understand, bits about the sales, the revenue, value propositions, etc. So now we've got AI introduced into those tools, where you can search for keywords, or you can pinpoint with your colleagues key highlights that they would like to look at afterwards. And then that 2-hour-long recording becomes 30 minutes, for example, with those 5-minute key highlights. And then you can also assign different action items to different people. I mean, there's so much more involved. But also with the basic licenses, the free licenses, you don't get those PSTN dial-in options, for example. If someone wants to join over the telephone because they're not wanting to use voice over IP for some reason, or whatever reason that might be, those don't come within the free licenses, etc. You just get the basic video, audio, and local recordings in different platforms.
This is
Right.
yeah, this is I mean amazing. I mean I see all these options, but you're right. It's all about going premium, because we are now recording this over Zoom, and if you don't pay premium, then we can't record 3 people together. So I think I see those value adds, like, okay, you cannot have a lot of people for a long duration. You can have them maybe for 30 minutes. And I think live captioning is very important. And one thing that struck me is that you have a 2 hour recording and it just shrinks it to 30 minutes. I think that is crazy, because we sometimes struggle when we are editing our videos, and it would be so easy if we can just shrink the video like that. Because yeah, you're right, no one wants to watch a 2 hour recording, and I think that's a very powerful feature. But outside the enterprise market, how many people are actually aware of these features? Because you don't see these features on Google Meet or Teams until unless you have an enterprise license. So is there a room for these services being available to the public, or they will always
Um,
be
yeah, that is actually interesting. I mean, I haven't seen this feature on Zoom. What about this shrinking down the meetings? What?
Yeah, no, good question. So essentially, obviously, with an enterprise license, the entire point is we're trying to cater to organizations that are going to use the licenses on a professional basis for their day-to-day meetings. They want to make sure it doesn't cut down. They want to make sure they can use the transcription features. The transcription features are very popular, especially because you can search for keywords that people are talking about if you want to look at that recording afterwards. And as Amit mentioned, absolutely, I understand that, you're not going to look at a 2-hour recording. So these features are not visible to users who are using the basic licenses because you get it for free, of course. It's easy, obviously during the pandemic, people have kind of, been in a panic mode, and they've just adopted whatever they could find for free, or, Microsoft Teams, which is free within the Office 365 subscription, etc. But they haven't planned this, there's a strategy behind this, looking at all of these other features. It's very important now, you see becoming more and more predominant within organizations. You'll have a lot more groups within LinkedIn, but I think it's more about adoption. So when you're telling the customers about the services, the different players, the big players that we have with Teams, Zoom, Google Hangouts, BlueJeans by Verizon, all of these major players are introducing these features and they're trying to catch up with each other. But I think it's more about the customer adoption. So when we're speaking to the customers, we need to explain to them. And so we need to make sure that they're making use of all the features, but understanding those features, because, you're looking at the platform, you know how to mute your microphone, stop your camera, you know how to hand over controls to your colleague, you know how to record locally, etc., share your screen. But what about the other features that you have? Maybe on a web interface, maybe on the web portal. You've got so many other features that you could make use of. And, like breakout rooms, for example, these features are, really useful, especially for the education sector where, or even the legal sector, with, criminals and a lawyer. I had a use case the other day where there was a lawyer wanting to speak to the defendant, and they had to speak in private. So they had to break that meeting up into different groups. And you need that security, you need that privacy. And these are the use cases that you get within an enterprise license that you need to train people about.
Right. So this is interesting. I mean, some of the features you mentioned. So not all the, correct me if I'm wrong, not all the features are available from all the providers. So Zoom have some unique features, whereas I'm guessing BlueJeans has some unique features that Zoom doesn't, and none of the other providers do. So there is definitely a need for training on each of the individual things to know and understand what are the unique features you're getting with whichever providers you're using. So that's that I hadn't thought about that before. I thought everyone usually gets the most popular popular features, and you kind of can do some things with your background, and that is available everywhere and that kind of thing. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it has become more of a collaborative tool rather than just video communication. I mean, nowadays, a lot of professional collaboration happens. I mean, I think, you could probably, share documents, and I think I've heard something like a multi-user whiteboard kind of thing where
Teams, yeah, Teams has that feature. So Teams actually is quite well integrated with the Microsoft platform, and Teams is like, I think Google Meets is trying to now replicate Teams. Teams is catching up with Zoom, and Meet is trying to catch up with Teams. I don't know where about BlueJeans. I've not used BlueJeans a lot, but I think they're all trying to like provide almost similar features at a different price point. I think live captioning, transcribing, I think that is really useful. Breakout rooms, I think that was a really good example. I never thought about it. I've used breakout rooms, but yeah, it's such an important use case, especially in a digital world where you can't meet someone in person. But I mean, we are only talking about video conferencing here, and the way to communicate over video. and then the different features around video. But what about email? I mean, you talked about unified communications as email, chat, video, audio. So the video and audio part I can get, but then how is email linked to it, and how is maybe chat linked to it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So that's a good question because more and more, all of these organizations are trying to make the user experience really seamless, right? Really simple. That's what it's all about. It's not, no one wants to use a video conferencing or audio conferencing or UC tool if it's complicated, if there's too many things to work on and configure, etc. So now, when I'm talking about email, what I mean is, whether it's Google Calendar or whether it's, Outlook, Office 365 Exchange, what we have are add-ins, right? So Zoom has an add-in, BlueJeans has an add-in, Google Hangouts has an add-in, for example, Teams, etc. So from a user perspective, we always want to make sure that it can align with their original workflow. So for example, I don't want to be trained on how to create a Teams meeting or a Zoom meeting or a BlueJeans meeting. All I want to do is create an Outlook appointment, invite my attendees as I would standardly, in a standard way, rather. And then I want to, instead of inviting a room, so instead of going physically into a room, I want to make it a virtual room via these different tools. So one click of a button, and then I'm making it a BlueJeans meeting, for example, and then I'm inviting my attendees. So it's not additional hassle. It's all there is from a user perspective is they're just clicking one button to make it a virtual meeting. And then that's how email is integrated into the workflow, because then they just, with one button, the user who is joining the meeting will click on the join link, and then with that URL, automatically they'll join that meeting. So that's how we go from scheduling a meeting via Outlook or Google Calendar, and then up until joining that meeting, and then using the various tools, like as you said, sharing screen, annotation, etc.
Right. Okay. So I think the objective is to be unseen. So, I mean, if you need to notice what tool you're using, then that's a problem. I mean, it should be so seamless that you don't even notice that you're using a tool. You're just having the conversation that you're there to have, rather than having to set up the tool, whatever it is that you're using. I suppose that's the overall objective. I haven't thought about it this way. So how far would you say we are from the Avengers type virtual reality holographic meetings that we saw in the last Avengers movie? Because they have like, they just start on something, and they're like four or five people just start, holographically start standing in front of the, that would be cool. How far away are we from that?
Oh, okay. That's a good question, but it's also, how far we are from that is not something I can comment on. But I will say there are really exciting things coming up on the roadmap for these organizations, because more and more we're looking at AI. And as I mentioned before, it's not just about joining a meeting and attending that meeting. It's now more about how we, portray people's interaction, how we capture those sort of, attentiveness, et cetera, and these things, whether they've got something else on their screen rather than looking at the meeting, et cetera. These things are coming, well, have already come, but we're introducing more features like the avatar. So we call it the avatar, where, where people are uncomfortable or shy, or for some privacy reasons, they don't want to enable their video, we can have an avatar of their choice portrayed on the screen. So essentially what we're doing is we're replicating their interaction, their enthusiasm, all of their reactions, really. So, if someone is in a meeting and they've got their camera turned off, that's absolutely fine, because the avatar will, show you how enthusiastic they are, how attentive they are to the meeting. So, if Rinat is not paying attention, for example, or he's getting bored, we can identify that, even though he's not on camera. And this is what AI is introducing. So we've got really exciting stuff coming up within all of these UC platforms. And I think the avatar is a really good one, because when we talk about augmented reality, we think about, replicating a scenario where we're at a conferencing table, just as you mentioned with the Avengers, we're at a table, we're together, but our avatars are kind of there. So even if our video or camera is turned off, that's not a problem, because we're going to have our avatars, portray our reactions.
And
Right. This is very interesting. I'm sorry, Amit. I was just going to say that. I always try to think about how to integrate different technologies with one another to sort of improve the overall experience. And one of the things I can think of that comes immediately is adding virtual reality with video conferencing. So you wear a VR headset and you can see everyone in a conference room. So that's one way of improving this whole UC experience. The other thing I just thought about, which is a little bit concerning, because I think I have seen a talk or read an article where it was possible to get the basic human biometrics from just looking at the live video. For example, our skin color changes ever so slightly with every heartbeat when the blood flow comes and goes. So every second it's changing. So from that, I've seen there was a tool where from live video you could kind of obviously computers can detect it, that ever so slight change in the blood flow, and based on that you can see the heart rate, and and it could be used for malicious purposes in a way, like for example, if someone is nervous, you have that information. You could, I don't know how you can use that, and then you're by tracking your eye movement as well, you could sort of figure out many things what they're doing. And sometimes you have reflection of the monitor in your eye, which in a very high quality video you could actually get some details of the person's computer screen, which are all some sort of privacy concern. I mean, for example, if you're using the heart rate to sort of identify, using it as like a lie detector machine, but it's not really ethical to use this information in this way without the permission of the person being used. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Because these are quite ethical questions, ethical dilemmas.
Yeah, they are ethical dilemmas, but you have to understand that, with every technology, there's a benefit and there's a disadvantage. Now, the more you advance technology and different tools, you will have security issues and privacy concerns, which is why we encrypt meetings, with different encryption methods. We make them secure, we lock them down to, only users that are supposed to be in that meeting. If we're in a meeting, all three of us, I mean, I doubt that we're going to be doing any of those things just because we've all been invited, and we'll kind of be able to track that. And that's why these reports that come within an enterprise tool are very, very important, because you look at those reports afterwards and you can see, what's being observed, who's doing what. You can do Wireshark traces, to capture these different elements of concern. But with as I mentioned, with every tool, with every technology advancement and enhancement, you're going to have, advantages and disadvantages, but they can all be looked into, investigated via these, extra tools that we have to look at reporting, look at traces, etc.
So I mean these are all the features, I mean really good, but for most of the users, they just care about how much my internet bandwidth will be consumed. If I start using video conferencing, everyone is mostly on a data plan now. Some people are on a limited data plan. So our our companies, I mean, you work for Blue Jeans, but then there are Zoom, Teams, and I mean, Google Meet and other organizations. Are they actually thinking about how to save the bandwidth for a consumer, be it enterprise or a normal consumer, and save bandwidth for them, because video conferencing can be quite bandwidth intensive, and when you're recording and suppose you have a virtual background, then it starts consuming a lot of bandwidth. So are organizations doing something to maybe compress the videos or have high quality compression or things like that? I'm not sure. I mean, are organizations doing something about this bandwidth problem? Because everyone is suddenly on the internet now, and everyone is now on a video call, either through the enterprise applications or on WhatsApp or Facebook or something else.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's a good question. So different organizations will have different responses to this problem. So for example, with the bandwidth and audio and video compression, we have companies that are using standard audio codecs like G711, G722.1, etc. And for video codecs, we're using H.264, H.265 plus, SVC, etc., etc. But then you also have companies that are using their own proprietary protocols to deal with these requirements, and they're building that into the application. For example, we can use audio vendors who will deal with the backend audio, for example, Dolby, and then they will have like spatial and wideband audio, but they'll also be compressing the bandwidth and making sure that aligns with the user's requirements. So whatever they're coming in with, we have, for example, an application that I work with. If you're on the phone, if you're on a mobile device, you have a low bandwidth mode. So what you can do is, if you're having quality issues, you can switch to low bandwidth mode, and that will align with the requirements that you have just to be on audio. You don't need to have video, etc., etc. So yes, there's a lot of back-end enhancements that are being done, especially with the various applications that we mentioned, Zoom, BlueJeans, Teams, Google, etc. So that's being done. But also, on that note, for example, there are events, communication. UC also includes the events platform. So like webinars, we have webinars to cater for, town hall meetings or all hands, which we couldn't, be there for physically anymore. Virtual trade events where everyone's joining from a similar location. How are we going to cope with that? So yeah, for example, the company that I'm working for, we have peer-to-peer streaming, where if two users are coming from this similar location, we're going to be sharing their bandwidth. And then also we've got, different applications that are just like, installed within the data centers. So if there's a lot of traffic coming from, say, London, we'll be installing something that will handle the RTP media stream to come out from that one application, rather than 5,000 people joining. So it's just one stream that's coming out, and this is how different people are handling various large events where there's 50,000 attendees, etc.
Right. Okay. I mean, this is very interesting, and also you mentioned, a unique feature from BlueJeans as well. So yes, yeah, I've heard about there are Zoom and Google Meet and various other sort of UC platforms. I've kind of heard about them from like word of mouth or whatever, but BlueJeans I haven't actually heard about. And also about you. I mean, obviously your journey into UC. I mean, obviously you've mentioned some of it from beginning. How it used to be. But yeah, tell us a bit about the company that you work for, BlueJeans. And we don't know about that. So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So BlueJeans is actually one of the older providers for a virtual meeting room. So what I mean by that is, you can have various people come in from various locations, no matter what they're using. They could be using a standard-based endpoint, what I mentioned with the IP and SIP-based systems, conferencing rooms, but also just having that vendor-agnostic ability, right, to join from any web browser. So no matter where you are, you can join with your phone, your tablet, your desktop, your laptop, video conferencing room, but that was what we were catering for. And as we grew along, we partnered with Microsoft. So we're not in competition with Microsoft, we're in partnership with them. So what we do is we provide that interoperability between a Teams meeting and these, SIP-based or HTTP-based endpoints. So there's only one of 4 vendors that does that. And it's just a gateway, essentially, in its simplest form. It's a gateway to allow that interoperability. So, we've been advancing according to the needs and requirements and how technology has been evolving. We're catering for that, essentially. And that's why, we provide the interrupt, but we don't provide, say, for example, the chat message, the IM messaging that I was telling you about. There are other companies that do that. They'll have it all integrated with phone. You can make a phone call, a video call, and chat with each other as well. We don't do that, but we do have really good APIs to integrate with other tools like Slack, for example. If we want to create a message or a BlueJeans meeting from Slack, we can do that. We can also create a Teams meeting to join into a BlueJeans meeting, etc., etc. But you'll notice that different providers provide different solutions. So we provide that gateway solution, as I mentioned, so that we can, complement the Teams offering, if you will. But then also, we've got other vendors that will have, room systems. So, for example, Zoom rooms. They provide the room solution where you can go into the conferencing room and with one touch join a meeting. We also have that solution in BlueJeans with a one touch to join feature. But you have to understand that different platforms will provide different things. There's MTRs, which are Microsoft Teams rooms as well, to join, from the Microsoft Teams room to a Teams meeting. But yeah, you'll notice that even Microsoft doesn't provide that interrupt. They've relied on different partners, like, for example, BlueJeans by Verizon to help out with that, because they wanted to focus on their MTR meeting rooms. But yeah, it's a very cool solution because what I mentioned with the key highlights features and the transcription and the searching for keywords, shrinking a meeting into half an hour from 2 hours, that's something that we do provide, and it's called smart meetings, because we're looking at efficiency, making the meeting efficient. It's not about just having meeting after meeting, discussing a meeting after a meeting. I mean, we're wasting a lot of time there, right? The whole point is we have other jobs to do. It's not just about being in a meeting, back to back. So it's about making any single meeting really efficient, assigning tasks afterwards to different people, to different action items, etc.
So I have a question here, Sabreena. All these apps, different features, is there some kind of standardization in the industry? Or is the industry looking at standardizing certain things like, okay, these are the standard features, they are over the standard protocols? Because you mentioned about interoperability. So I think that's quite important and it's quite powerful, because if I'm using Google and I want to now have a chat with someone on Teams, I should be able to use just that app but make a Teams call. I don't know, is there something like that where you can you can use Google Meet to have a Teams call, like you mentioned, Teams having BlueJeans or BlueJeans having Teams call? So is the industry working towards standardization? Because I see that there are so many platforms now providing almost the same service, so it's getting very competitive. So is there an approach by these big organizations towards standardization?
So I'm going to say no to that, just from my own experience, because with competition and with, say, for example, each of these different providers having their own proprietary protocol, they don't want to be able to interoperate with everyone, which is why I mentioned the Teams and the BlueJeans interop, or the Teams and interop between standard-based conferencing rooms. This is only done by 4 providers globally, and this is worldwide. So there's a reason for that, right? Because say, for example, Zoom, I mean, what they're trying to do is have an entire UC as a service platform. They want that, the phone, they've got the Zoom phone, they've got the rooms, they've got the IM and presence to see if someone's online and call them directly. So they're providing a different solution. But if everyone competes to the same solution, it's not going to work. I mean, as we know, especially in 2020, Zoom sort of became a synonym for video conferencing. Microsoft Teams has also accelerated with their use, just because, as I mentioned before, people were panicked and they just wanted to use what they had in their existing subscription. So they hadn't planned using different tools or didn't want to look that way. But now, this year, I've been seeing more and more people are looking at what they can use, what are the different features they can have. So yeah, I don't think that standardization will occur, just because not everyone wants to interoperate with each other, and it's a bit complicated because of their own protocols. But we do have gateways in place. For example, the reason BlueJeans partnered with Microsoft is that Microsoft Teams, we saw their accelerated growth and we wanted to be a part of that. So we've obviously done that. More and more of the customers are coming to implement that interop, especially because now we're working toward a hybrid workforce, right? This is where the future is going. There'll be people working from home and there'll be people in the office. So how do we join, a physical meeting, say an all hands meeting in the office, in a conferencing room, with workers joining from home? The only way to do that is with that interoperability. So we're kind of embracing that hybrid environment, and yeah, that's on the roadmap. And well, that's already in place, but on the roadmap, there's lots of exciting features to come with, one touch to join and so on.
Right. Okay. I mean, of course, yeah, you're right. I mean, all of these providers have to have some sort of USP that is only unique to themselves, and they can use that to sort of attract their customers. And whoever thinks that unique USP is valuable enough and then they can join. They can sort of subscribe to that platform, and it's actually quite eye-opening to know the USPs that you mentioned. Smart meetings is it, and that's only available in BlueJeans, and then some sort of bandwidth controlling system as well. And these things are actually quite good to know. I mean, knowing the unique features of the provider is you don't get that information very often very easily.
Just to add to your point, sorry to interrupt. So recently, Verizon acquired BlueJeans, and that gives us the ability to, innovate so much more and so much quickly, because they've made a huge investment in the UC space. So they're looking at, after the pandemic, they're looking at how we can introduce more of AI into the platform. But with that acquisition, as we're aware, Verizon is a network provider. So we're not only delivering a tool, a platform, or an application, we can also deliver that end-to-end connectivity. So, customers that are already with Verizon, they can have a direct connect with our MPLS network. So that gives that, that will improve the quality, improve security in so many ways. And I think that they're really exciting things to come with those connectivity, the connectivity with Verizon. But also there are other really exciting features coming along, like, obviously I mentioned the transcription, smart meetings, but, with the sort of emojis, etc. I know it seems like a minor thing, but sometimes, if you don't want to interrupt, but you want to make a comment or just applaud someone or congratulate someone, these are quite relevant things. But we also have introduction to, who's in which time zone. So we're following a system of geo-routing, where the user that is dialing in to a meeting will be connected to the closest data center to them. And, we have data centers in all the continents. So we've got APAC, East Coast and West Coast of the US, EMEA, etc. But also we have, points of presence now as a SaaS provider in AWS. With the gateway solution, we've got it in Azure, and video conferencing, not only video conferencing, but the whole UC platforms and tools have come such a long way, because before, when I started, it was all on-premise. So you weren't able to develop features or all of these exciting, new ideas very quickly. Now with the SaaS-based solution that all the major vendors are supplying, we're able to develop very quickly and, adapt to the accelerating requirements. But yeah, we've got a lot of cool features. We can identify people's local time zones, and so on.
So one of the things I wondered as soon as I heard the name Blue Jeans. I mean, it's an interesting name. What is the story behind the name? Do you know, or I mean, obviously I know.
To be honest, no. I did hear it one day, and I think it was literally something like, okay, so, and don't quote me, but I did hear that the founders of Blue Jeans wanted to make it something that's just every day. Everyone has a blue pair of jeans, so it's kind of, they wanted to make a tool that would be, sort of, highlighting that. So it's just basically like a user-friendly, adaptable. It's something that we all use on a daily basis, kind of thing. That's how the name came to be. But that's just what I've heard about the founders.
All right. Okay, that is interesting. I mean, yeah, of course, yeah. It's it's probably from word of mouth, but yeah, I mean, it's still an interesting, story. Sorry, Amit, you were gonna say something.
I actually forgot. I had a good insight while you were talking about the features, and then I suddenly forgot about it. But I mean, moving on. I mean, we talked about the features itself, and then we talked about the bandwidth problem, and then we talked about standardization. What about security? I mean, of course, all the platforms are thinking about security, but can you talk a bit more about what do these platforms do in order to like enable? And I think one other question I was thinking about is platforms. So everyone keeps using either Windows or OS X. What about Linux and Unix support? Are these enterprise solutions available on these platforms as well? Because some people don't want to use Windows; they just want to use a Linux machine. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good question as well. So the answer is yes and no, because there are, there's organizations that will initially start developing the platform on Windows, because that's, that was most common. But now there are organizations that are starting to work equally with Mac OS and the Windows platform as well. But with Linux, for example, what I've noticed with these cloud SaaS providers is that they do develop the features on Linux, because as you said, yeah, users will want to use Linux. And I've seen that more and more recently. But then the features will be a bit behind. So, they'll develop, product management will develop Windows and Mac OS X first, and then they'll develop Linux and Unix operating systems. So there is a bit of a gap between the platforms, but yes, they are. So some organizations are developing it more quickly, and some are further behind.
And then what about the security aspect?
Yeah. So the second part to your question. So there's two aspects, two sides to this, right? There's privacy and there's security. Now, that's again what's required with an organization, in an enterprise solution. Yes, with a basic user, you're not really that bothered with security, encryption, etc. But with, say, for example, an enterprise organization, yes, we have to cater for that. And organizations are doing that. From the privacy perspective, you'll see meetings have various options, like you can lock down the meetings, you can remove users, etc. You can enable features like waiting room. The waiting room is a feature where if you join as a host, only I can allow you in the meeting. So if I see that Amit has joined, I don't know who Amit is. He wasn't invited to the meeting. Somehow he must have obtained the URL. Maybe someone forwarded the invite to him, but I won't allow you in the meeting. So there are these various features that are being developed and are developed in the platforms. But also you can lock down a meeting, you can enable password, additional passwords, etc. And this obviously helps with situations like, we've heard in the news where, there was a government board meeting and one user from a location just joined because they somehow got the meeting URL, and they were hearing really confidential, information. It's really unsecure, really not a professional solution, because if any user can just join from anywhere and hear all of this information, what if there's information that's, it's not supposed to be published until a certain date and time? This is like detrimental to a country, but also with legal scenarios, if there's, a conversation between a criminal, a defendant, and the lawyer, and someone just has the URL and they joined it, or just guesses, a meeting ID and joins it, that's not ideal, because they'll hear a lot of information that shouldn't be published, and they could just come in, with their video off. If there's no, like meeting tones that has been enabled from the host perspective, they won't even know because they're very deep in conversation. So that's really, really dangerous. And that's why we need a secure platform that covers that privacy side, security side. But also with the privacy, I will mention, now that more and more people are working from home, it's become important to have the virtual backgrounds, right? Because, to maintain that work-life balance, I might have things going on behind me, maybe a whiteboard that I have, really confidential ideas published, or even from a personal perspective, kids running around, et cetera, et cetera. The virtual background has become a very popular feature within the UC tools. It might just be a beach with, a relaxing beach, or it could be a more professional company logo, but no one will then see what's happening. I might have the washing drying behind me, etc. And that's not really professional. We used to work in the office before. Virtual backgrounds weren't really important. Now they are becoming crucial, not just a luxury anymore. So for privacy purposes, that matters. For any other reason, if people don't want to enable their cameras and show their background. But from security perspective, yes. So it has to be an enterprise grade solution, right, that has encryption enabled. Now, with encryption, it's always impossible to have, well, not, I won't say impossible, but difficult to have end-to-end encryption in multi-point meetings. WhatsApp point-to-point calls are end-to-end encrypted. Facebook Messenger is end-to-end encrypted. But when you have a multi-point call using a bridge, a cloud-based bridge, it's not easy to enable end-to-end encryption. The encryption, for example, can be enabled between the client and the server, so wherever you're joining from, but then that will be decrypted, etc., and then encrypted again. So yeah, but you need to have at least a level of encryption with data at rest and data in transit. Over TLS 1.2 is what we provide, and most of the vendors provide for data in transit. But you've got either AES 128-bit encryption or 256-bit encryption, depending on whether it's at rest or in transit. So that's really important to have, even though it's not end-to-end encrypted. But we do allow, say, for example, conferencing rooms are more, it's riskier to have those connections because there could be ghost or spam calls that people are just making. Hackers can easily dial into meetings. So for those, we do allow, and other organizations also allow, only encrypted endpoints to join. So if it's not encrypted, then they won't be able to join, and so on.
That's a lot of valuable information. I think we never think about this. I mean, we are just using the tools, and we never think about the technology or the protocols that are used to actually make it so seamless. And we just click a button, join a Zoom call. We don't even think. I mean, yeah, I use virtual backgrounds, and I actually never thought about, okay, it's actually, yeah, you're right. It hides the background, so it's important for a lot of people, especially where you have pets, you have kids, you have your laundry drying. So yeah, it's a very important factor, and quite useful. So I mean, we talked about all these things. So suppose a person like me wants to now be a UC expert. How do start this journey? How do I become a UC expert? I mean, of course, it took you so many years, and when you started, the industry was quite different, and now the industry has quite evolved. It's more cloud-based solutions, etc.
Mhm.
But so starting now, what skill sets do you think a person needs to join an organization or UC as a industry?
Okay, so that's actually a very tough one because UC, as I mentioned before, is such a vast area, right? There's network, there's architecture, there's
Yes.
security and telephony, video, you know, IM and presence. There are so many various aspects. So, I mean, first of all, it might depend on maybe someone wants to specialize in cloud-based solutions. So they would start with, AWS or Azure Foundation courses to see how architecture would work. Setting up points of presence in various locations. But then, if someone wants to work directly in, say, video, audio conferencing, or companies like Zoom or BlueJeans by Verizon, etc., they would go for specific telepresence courses, or there are many courses. And what I'll do after is I'll send you some links that will be valuable. But I think there's no such one course that will cover everything. I mean, I've done CCNA, for example, and that's based only on the network side of things, the layers. But then now I've developed into looking at the platform as a whole, developing the product. I'm a pre-sales engineer, and I used to work in support to customer success to network administrator, and now I'm in pre-sales. So there's various aspects to this, but yeah, I can share some valuable links afterwards.
Okay, and while thinking about all these things, I was thinking about, okay, what about space communications? So there are astronauts now in the International Space Station, and soon people will be starting to travel to outer space. So are companies thinking about how do you do video conferencing over? I mean, if a person is here on the planet Earth and someone is outside in space, I mean, what does actually NASA use for video conferencing when they're actually talking to astronauts?
Yeah, so so NASA uses various platforms, but not to mention too much, not to dig too much deep into that. But there are communications over satellite, and that especially now that the organizations are sort of digging deeper into, looking into. But also, just because you mentioned the space, we're also doing a lot in telehealth and education sectors, for example. Previously I mentioned breakout rooms where children can go into different groups and then rejoin into a specific room, and so on. These are very cool features to have, but also in telehealth, there's a lot going on, and I think it was 81% of there was a research where a survey where 81% of health organizations have said how they're investing so much over the next 2 to 3 years within telehealth sector, just because we're going to make healthcare not only, it won't be called a virtual visit or remote visit anymore. It's just going to be a visit. That's how we're trying to do it, so that a user can simplify their experience, book an appointment via APIs, of course. They'll book an appointment, schedule that with an expert, a healthcare expert, a doctor, and then dive into that meeting directly without having to, do various bits, open various tools. It's just one click after another, and that's in various organizations. Telehealth is becoming very popular. There's a lot of investment going on, but also a lot of money to be saved there as well. I think they're trying to make that really efficient for the user, for the patient. Yeah.
I think telehealth is already being used by companies like Vitality and Babylon Health in the UK, where you can actually phone your GP. I'm not sure if that is the same thing, but you can schedule a call with a GP and then you can quickly talk to your GP. And I think that's quite seamless now, and I think it's quite useful. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
those are I think really important features. And you mentioned about in the beginning, Rinat mentioned about virtual reality and the VR glasses. So can we actually install Blue Jeans on a VR glass? Like can we find it on the Oculus store and then install it and maybe join from there?
That doesn't exist yet, but we do have plans for that. I mentioned the augmented reality, and there's a lot of development in AI. One thing I will mention is, in 2019, there was a research that said there was only about the $8 million US that was invested in AI on UC platforms. But now what we're predicting within the UC industry is by 2026, there's going to be about $1.2 billion US for AI. And that, includes the avatars that I mentioned, augmented reality. We talked about virtual backgrounds, but also we're trying to, and it's not as mature yet, but we're trying to develop a situation where we can attend a meeting without being in the meeting. So what I mean by that is essentially, maybe I'm on annual leave tomorrow, but there's a very important meeting where I want to, have some contribution. I have some important things to say or hear. And then what I can do is send a virtual assistant to that meeting to then, listen to the keywords, to contribute what I have, all of my ideas. And then I can, I can be a part of that meeting without having even been there. And this is really cool. And this is something that is coming. We're looking at that, but it's not there just yet. But this is really cool.
Oh, that is really amazing. I mean, obviously, the word AI and machine learning gets thrown around a lot, but when you mentioned AI, in video conferencing or in UC, I wasn't sure how it's, but wow, that is really cutting edge.
That is game changer. I mean, everyone will use that then. Everyone will have their assistants. It's like their own personal assistant. Go attend meetings.
Absolutely. And the aim is to, as I mentioned, the aim is to make the individual meetings more efficient rather than have additional meetings. So, you want to reduce the number of meetings and make the individual meetings more efficient. And that's where I think we're going with, UC, and that's the future. It's not about just the communication. It's about, everything related to AI, looking at people's reactions and trying to assess so that we can use those for our communications, to make it as real and lifelike as possible.
Great. I mean, this has been like a really thorough and quite informative conversation. I mean, a lot of things I've learned I didn't know before, and I'm sure our audience would also really be, really, it would be eye-opening for them to know all of this information as well. Is there anything anything else that we've kind of missed out on like important questions about you? I know UC is such a vast space. I mean, we've kind of loitered around the video conferencing more because that's the it thing right now. But UC is so much more, as you mentioned. But is there anything that like a big, like, crucial piece of information or question we should have asked, but like some really important thing that you would like to mention or would like to say about UC?
Well, all I'm going to say is watch the space, because there's a lot of exciting things coming up. Because of the pandemic, in 2020, organizations started. It's not just now a luxury, or it's a necessity. Every organization is going to use one tool or the other. And in 2020, it was about the major players like, Zoom, Blue Jeans, Microsoft Teams, Google Hangouts. But I think the prediction for the next year is watch out for smaller players as well that are going to have to integrate with various tools like Slack, Zoom, Blue Jeans, just so that they can implement AI into those platforms and all of the other integrations via the API. So they're going to publish their APIs more and more. But yeah, there's really exciting things to come. Yeah, that's that from me.
And any open source versions possible?
I think there are a few open source versions, but they're very limited in features. And a lot of them are using WebRTC, which essentially allows them to use any browser, any supported browser. Others are using proprietary protocols, but yeah, no open source versions that will have all of these features that you need to make a meeting efficient rather than just hear and see each other.
And is the communication? I know we thought of ending this, but I'm just thinking it out loud. I mean, we talked about communication, but communication could be anything. It's not just about meetings, right? It's about meeting people as well, and
Mm-hmm.
it's about going online and like dating.
Mm-hmm.
People want to date, so they have to use some kind of a platform to see each other. So that's one
Yeah.
aspect. You mentioned telehealth, then you mentioned education. There is space sector where people are talking to astronauts. So there
Mm-hmm.
are various applications. What are the different spaces or sectors actually does the UC cover, or does it cover every sector that we can think of?
So again, this depends on the company. So for example, within Blue Jeans, we provide the meetings platform, but also an events platform. So to cater for more than 50,000 attendees, we could even stream to Facebook Live, YouTube, etc. When these become necessary, yeah, there are additional requirements. You have to think about bandwidth and how to maintain that, as I mentioned before. But um, there's so many different use cases. You mentioned dating, telehealth, education. I mentioned the legal sector where people are talking to criminals. We have HR situations where there's an interview going on. You need to keep that restricted. Um, or, town hall meetings, all hands. Especially now, we used to go to physical all hands meetings in companies. Now we're doing that virtually. So to cater for that, and there's so many sort of requirements or use cases that I can think of that, yeah, it's just endless really. But we also, there's more coming up in, I think this comes more from a C-level, a top-down communication for, employees to say, join like team lunches, virtual team lunches so that people can interact, or we can have sessions that we had a truffle making experience a few days ago. All of us got together, we had the ingredients, and we all, made chocolate virtually. But then we showed each other what we were making. All of these things is just trying to make it more realistic and lifelike, so that we don't miss out on that. It's been so long that we haven't, physically been in the office, or we won't need to anymore. It's not going to be the same. We'll have the hybrid workforce, but essentially we need to make sure that we can meet our new colleagues, for example, new starters globally, and a lot of HR initiatives are coming from the top down, just to implement those, to make new team members meet together, or we can have happy hour where everyone's having a drink or some dinner together, and then we can talk about movies. What's your favorite movie? Now we have nothing to do. We're watching more and more movies. We might want to get advice from each other. Just a coffee break and so on. And more and more things are coming on that side.
Okay, and one last question from me. Trust me, this is the last question. I keep having these questions. Fatigue.
Fine.
Fatigue. So a lot of times people talk about Zoom fatigue, right? Even Zoom CEO had Zoom fatigue. It was in the news. So how do you like? Okay, now we are having this conversation. So my focus is on you when you're talking. I'm not focusing on Rinat. So he's
Mhm.
there on my screen, but my focus is on you, not on Rinat. So how do
Mhm.
you solve that problem? Because I think this is the biggest challenge in video conferencing. Like I've noticed this when there are 50 people in a conference, you can have conversation, but what happens is only few people end up talking to each other. The remaining are just spectators.
Yeah.
So how is
That's.
how are
Mhm.
companies thinking to solve that problem? I know Microsoft. I think Satya Nadella recently introduced this feature where you're all sitting together in a like a conference room, and you have your faces on put on some bodies, and you feel like you are in an amphitheater or something like that. They're trying to make it more inclusive so you can have a look at everyone, but it's still sometimes very difficult to focus and like you go to a pub, you can't replicate that. You go to a meeting, you can't just replicate
Mhm.
that instantly, right? Because every focus is just to the person who's talking. Like you both are now looking at me, you're not looking at each other. So that's the problem with video conferencing. So how are companies thinking to solve that problem? My last question.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. And that's a good question. And what I will say, this is called video fatigue, right? So we call it video fatigue. And essentially, this is a big problem that you mentioned. It's coming on more and more, especially during lockdown and after the pandemic. Everyone's working from home. They're joining meetings. We did a research on this, and 74% of organizations or people in organizations have rated their meetings to be poor or bad. 34% of meetings have been classified as being useless. So, but then why are we joining meetings? Why are people joining meetings? And what we think in that situation, I think we'd like to call it FOMO, which is fear of missing out. So essentially, I'll join a meeting because I there might be some key points that if I'm in sales, for example, there might be some key points that are being mentioned that are coming up, new features, etc., new sort of opportunities that I need to know about, and so on. So I'll keep the meeting running. I'll be joining the meeting, but it's kind of useless. But I'll be looking at email, doing things on the background, and then suddenly I'll hear a word that will be of importance to me. So I'll be joining the meeting, but the video fatigue again comes into play. And I think what we're doing there is it's really important to use AI and to adapt more and more quickly to AI, just because we're looking at, I mentioned those avatars, for example. If you don't keep your video on, I want to make sure that Rinat is paying attention, for example, and I can look at those facial expressions, but also we get attentiveness scores, and that's what AI is introducing, to see someone's attentiveness. And then I can say, oh, Rinat, what do you think about what I just mentioned, and things like that. So there's a lot of tools, a lot of new features that are coming up in AI to address the video fatigue more and more, because it's, as you mentioned, it's a big dilemma right now. And we're joining meetings, so it's about, again, I can't stress this enough, but it's to make the meetings more effective rather than have more meetings. We don't want to keep having more meetings, but we want to make them efficient. We want to look at the transcriptions afterwards, look at the keywords, but then we haven't missed out on anything. We don't have to keep joining meetings just for the sake of them. And then this is how we can avoid that. You reduce the number of meetings, working from home, etc.
Well, this has been really fascinating. I mean, when Rinat told me about this topic, I was like, okay, what's unified communications? We understand everything about Zoom, Teams, and other things, but I think talking to you makes me appreciate it much more. I think we never think about these finer aspects of like backgrounds and transcription, transcribing, meeting, just like booking through calendar and just joining with a link with a single click. I think those are very important features, and you normally don't think about it. So thank you so much for this wonderful insight into this field of unified communication. This has been really useful, and I'm sure our audience has also found this quite fascinating, because I think people from the general population normally don't hear this term. They just hear the tool. They hear Google Meets, they hear Zoom, but no one hears about unified communication. So thank you so much for coming on our show and then giving us insight to this wonderful world.
No, it's been a pleasure, and thank you for having me. I'm really glad that it was useful.
Great, that is amazing. Yes, it was an eye-opening episode, and yeah, thanks again for explaining UC to us. To the audience, hopefully you guys have enjoyed this talk. I mean, this was very informative for me and Amit as well. I think there are a lot of information that you won't find just by googling or just on the internet directly. But hopefully this will give you a better understanding on UC and what are the things that are goes on behind the scenes when we're using all of these tools. So yeah, do check out all our previous episodes, and please get back to us if you have any questions. Even if you have any questions to our guests, we can reach out to them and have some sort of interaction. So yeah, please do reach out to us if you have any questions or any advice on future topics. Thanks again, Sabreena, for joining us and enlightening us with all this information. We're going to end the talk here. Thank you, everyone.